Director, I can't.
Got it.
Public meeting. Huh? Is that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Speak.
Okay, y'all are on. I don't know if Bob's on. I don't see him on here, so I'm not sure.
But you're only gonna have to be hot. The mic says Bob for recording.
Okay, I'll call the special meeting of the Planning and Development Committee to order. And hopefully Councilman Jackson can join us while we're there. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Ms. Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. This workshop kind of has two different things I'd like to discuss. Unlike it says on the agenda, I'm actually going to discuss the accessory structures first, if that's okay with y'all.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Here's the only reason I would suggest we not.
Okay.
If Bob is not with us, I'd rather, the first part, I think, is more me explaining how.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm not sure there's a decision.
Somebody,
The lodging issue, short-term rentals. I got a call from Margie Pizarro, who has a house on Cedar Street, office on Cedar Street. And her question was, I found out that I cannot use my office for short-term rent. I can only do long-term rent. And I said, well, on the surface, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because you're
here, you can do the.
what is predominantly a commercial area. And so I called Jesse and sure enough, that was the fact. And I guess the way we laid out districts of the town, that kind of where she falls in. That.
Sorry.
Well,
Yeah, he's on speakerphone until we get the Zoom. He's got on Zoom.
okay.
Does he have a bad connection or something? Or he's on the beach. I'm not on the beach.
Yes,
Here.
yes,
But-
You want me to put it?
But at any rate, for those on the television, my question was, the way the regs are written right now within the UBO, it seems to me we ought to determine if an area is predominantly commercial, that there would be a way for someone to do short-term rentals. If an area is mainly predominantly majority residential, that we don't want short-term rentals at that area. So how do we take the language that we have and I'll say apply a more common sense view to the areas of town that seem to be out of whack with that, if that's a good way to explain it.
Yes, and Terry brought it, well, we were already aware of the issue because Marty had talked to him. And we took a closer look at the use chart for lodging in general, and realized that we do have a few inconsistencies in there. So maybe more than just figure out what areas of town make the most sense, because if you look on the sheet that provided. You look at the sheet I provided, under neighborhood mixed use, if you look what's highlighted, we have homestay, bed and breakfast, which is up to 5 guest rooms. And really, the only difference between a homestay, bed and breakfast and a short-term rental is that homestay, bed and breakfast limits you up to 5 guest rooms. Whereas a short-term rental has no.
I think we're good.
But a homestead bed and breakfast is an outright, permitted use for the mixed use, whereas.
trying to,
Is a conditional use. And the issue that came up with Margie is that one of the main conditions is that it has to be owner occupied. And the neighborhood mixed use, if you're a business, you're usually not going to be owner occupied because you're not living there, it's a business. So it kind of seems counterintuitive that you wouldn't allow a business to have a short-term rental, but you would allow them to have a live. So I guess I was just looking for kind of some insight from y'all as to whether you think maybe we should change that conditional use in the neighborhood mixed use for short-term rentals to permit it. And the other thing, the other issue there is you've got a short-term rental as conditional, but you've got an inn, which is up to 24 rooms as permitted. And that really makes no sense. I'm not sure how that occurred. I know we went back and forth a number of times with these lodging uses, so I think it just kind of got lost in the shuffle. But to me, I think it would make more sense to have the short-term permitted in the neighborhood mixed use and have the inn not be allowed at all, just because that seems like it's 24 rooms is really small.
So define neighborhood mixed use.
So neighborhood mixed use is what some of our B1 and B2 used to be B1 and B2, which were our neighborhood business and our neighborhood business center was B2, and B1 was residential business and our previous in areas that were more of the urban areas of town, so like along the 78 corridor, along Cedar Street, those areas we changed to the neighborhood mixed use. And that is meant to accommodate both residential and commercial uses that are compatible with each other. So it's usually the more less intense commercial uses. It does allow restaurants, but it doesn't allow like just a bar. It does allow for retail under a certain size. So the retail can't be more than 5,000 square feet. So it's the less intense commercial uses and also residential uses.
That's a good question. If you have the mixed use, you've got your commercial and your area, residential. If you lump it all together, you would be able to do short-term residential piece of it.
Technically, yeah, I mean, technically, if it was a neighborhood mixed use, that was truly a mixed use parcel that had neighbor, like had commercial in the front, residential behind, and an owner lived in, in the residential, yes, it would be short-term rentals.
Only on the
Right, which seems kind of, I mean,
And
now that we're dealing with it, it doesn't really make sense. Right. Why? Because also if you look at neighborhood business, which was what the other B1 and B2 properties we changed to is the NB business, it does permit short-term rentals, no matter whether you live there. And it was the same previous zoning that had it just in the more suburban areas of town.
Well, what I'm sorry, the only reason I'm asking this is I'm feeling a situation myself.
Sure.
In my neighborhood where it's mixed use.
Right.
And there's a residential component, it's all residential. But they're short-term there. And even though you're supposed to have owner occupied, they're not. And it's causing a lot of issues. So,
So if we're out on Orange, Dorchester Road, the new area that's coming in there. Or for that matter, we're on Main Street.
Okay.
Like, they're gonna have commercial in that stuff. You're gonna have residential behind. Right? If I'm on the solitary property, and I've got the apartments that are supposed to be there, the businesses and all that will be there. And then now I go back a street and I'm now in a residential neighborhood, what is allowed in that residential neighborhood?
So that property is on PUD, and the regulations that are specified in the PUD are the internet, the neighborhood mixed use regulations. So at this time, it would have to be owner occupied to do a short term. But it's not gonna ever be owner occupied because it's very rent. So
Yeah, but they're generally long-term.
they do,
rent.
yes, correct.
Yeah.
And I'm sure their long-term rental agreements still offer. But
So how do we word something? What I personally would not want to happen
Mhm.
is that American Homes for Rent or anybody else
decides to make it all short term.
decides I'm going to make this short-term rental. And then I think therein lies the issue
So
that
I
we
think
have,
then-
with yours is what I'm talking about.
So then I think the issue there is we need to address the conditions, specify in the conditions that if it's a commercial use of the property, this condition doesn't apply, and that condition doesn't apply, but if it's a residential, a full residential use of the property, then it does apply. I mean, if that's what you want. That's what you're trying to differentiate.
Yeah, but there are two parts to the parcel.
I know, but I'm saying like if the actual structure is a residential only use, then you can still like.
Even
you
though
can
it's in
still-
the next neighborhood.
Right, we will still require those documents. If the actual structure is primarily a commercial use or a true mixed use where you've got commercial on the bottom and residential above, something like that, then the owner occupancy wouldn't be required. I haven't
Okay.
thought about it that way, so that's just off the cuff. My thinking of how you could differentiate that is change the way you word the conditions. So I mean, that's something I can certainly research and see if anybody else has done it that way. To see how that wording and talk to GW.
At least in my mind, what we're trying to achieve is if the area that you want to do short-term rental is in where its neighbors are predominantly commercial, that's okay. If you are in the area where your neighbors are houses and people who are either house owners or long-term renters of houses that we don't want short-term rental there. But no matter what all these designations are, I don't know if we might have to have another subset or something, but I just don't think we don't want short-term rental in places where the usage idle, the council, we, I don't want us to have an area that is a residential neighborhood predominant, wherever the neighborhood stops and whatever it encompasses, to be able to have short-term rental.
Well, they can now, as long as they meet the conditions. And one of those conditions has to be around.
Oh, no, I'm speaking.
You mean
I
just
don't-
outright?
outright. That, no, but if you want to rent a room like your house and you live there, that's up to you.
So I will
Owner
look
occupied, right?
into this. And we have a
And
very specific definition of what.
Okay,
That's, that council. I will-
it's not me renting his house.
Owner occupancy, if you look on the bottom, I
I'm overseeing.
put in there what that 3.4.3 lodging, A, and then number 1 gives you how we determine the owner occupancy. So it's pretty specific.
Okay,
It doesn't, as far as I can tell, there's really no loophole for that.
okay.
Because previously we did have.
have to adjust the conditions.
Yeah, so basically what we need to look at doing, I assume, that we would just need to look at adding a sentence or two to that owner residency required that specifies, or coming up with different conditions for the short-term rental in terms of, see right now, owner occupancy required just says see requirements of this one. But we may need to do it, so definition of owner occupancy to differentiate between, it's this year is it may be kind of difficult, and that's why I want to check with GWs, because if you're talking about what the surrounding areas, how's the surrounding area that change uses, particularly if it's still something that allows both commercial and residential, then you're kind of like, what's allowed changes as well.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and so if I were to ask, mention it to us, when we came in, if I go to Magnolia,
Mhm.
take me from Doty and Magnolia to second or third in Magnolia, east and west. What can you do on both sides?
Well, so Doty and Magnolia, I believe is different mixed use still. Whereas, you know, first west and east, first North Street and Magnolia would be downtown mixed use. So downtown mixed use, as you can see, allows for everything basically except a full hotel. Whereas the neighborhood mixed use currently, which I'm assuming they'll probably want to take away the use of an inn for neighborhood mixed use, but I wanted to verify that. Because right now, in neighborhood mixed use, an inn of up to 24 rooms is just permitted. If you are comfortable with that, particularly since a bed and breakfast.
I don't know if it makes sense to have it permitted.
Yeah.
But maybe there's conditions.
Okay, or you can make it a special exception, which is where you have conditions and in addition, it has to go to these days, so we can look at and have said for the inn. That's another way to do the short-term rental as well, is to have it as a special exception. We do that in GR3 and GR5, short-term rental is a special exception, rather than just being a conditional use, because those are areas where everyone around is going to be residential generally. And so, you know, and if everyone around is okay with it, then it's okay. But if everyone around is not okay with it, then generally it's a special exception. Strong concerns about it.
I just think about that. Maybe that's.
Well, again,
I
like I
just
said, I don't
hate
think
to
we need
force
to
everything
make
to
any-
the BZA.
Yeah, no, and we try to
I mean,
avoid
if
having to go.
it's a
and make sure
residential
that-
neighborhood, I'm sorry, you don't get to choose. Can't do short-term rental.
Well, right now it is a special exception. I think that was what we landed on previously, just to
And so, but who decides special exception?
the BZA.
Only the BZA. Oh, okay. Well,
There's a public hearing at
Yeah.
the BZA.
And they have to meet all the conditions as well.
And
Okay.
as of right now, we have about a 66% approval rate. We have 3 applications. 2 have been approved, 1 is still.
So. Oh, yes, Pat.
I'm not familiar with the Cedar Street property that y'all were discussing, but for instance, I have a project that's been submitted where they want to do a short-term rental. It's owned by an LLC. I'm not sure how many people are involved in that LLC, but it's in a GR2 zone lot. So I'm just wondering if, because you're talking about allowing someone who has maybe like a true mixed use lot with residential in the back, you know, they can do that. But if an LLC owns a property, how, I mean,
Where is the property?
it is just outside of the historic district, Carroll
Carol.
Court.
They would have to get,
I mean, they have to meet the owner occupancy anyway,
yeah,
which if it's got more than two
Doesn't
people,
have
it's
to-
probably gonna be very difficult to meet.
I was just throwing it out there because, if I'm them and I own this and it's an investment property for me and it's part of my business. Shouldn't shake this.
Well, and I
Yeah,
guess
it's
we don't
not- I'm
really
not
want,
immediately approved.
yeah, and I guess we don't really want GR2 properties.
Right, this one's kind of an outlier, but it does
I mean,
happen.
but where are you talking about? Every single house that touches that in any direction is a residential
Right.
house. There is no short-term rental. Just,
Well,
in my
if they-
mind, it shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, if they meet, but technically, if they meet the conditions, if it's a 3-person LLC and one of them lives there for half the year, it meets the tax.
Well,
They have to
one of
show-
them is still doesn't meet it. Two of them would have to live there.
Okay,
Yeah, it has to be 50%. But, yeah, I mean, if they meet the conditions, it would still need the special exception.
so,
So it has, still have to be approved. by
If it's
the
GR2, it's just.
Oh, GR2, excuse me.
If it's
Then, yeah, if
GR5,
they meet
then it's a
the,
special
so what's the, and I'm just throwing this out there, what's the reason for having GR2 be conditional and not special exception?
my understanding from when, not my understanding, my recollection from when we previously discussed it was that GR2 properties are much larger. And so it would have much less effect on the neighbors if you have additional people on the property.
Many also have existing accessory dwelling units,
Existing cottages.
servants' quarters, cottages,
I mean, it seems GR2 is where they're most popular anyway.
Correct.
Um,
Well, the thought was, I mean, GR3, we don't have any of those properties on that right now, but GR5, I mean, that's an 8,500 square foot lot.
Right.
You know, if you start having a lot of short-term rentals in GR5, that's gonna have a significant impact.
Yeah, I just have always found it strange that GR2 wasn't a special exception, but it seems like it's high demand.
Well,
Income for
and
those people that have
also,
larger
I mean, although you can have a bed and breakfast in any one of those three if you meet the conditions. The bed and breakfast, you only, I mean, you only have up to 5 rooms, but 5 rooms is decent amount of rooms. But that was how our previous ordinance was. And so we just kept it the same. Because we hadn't been having issues with it.
I don't think we have anything in the ordinance that addresses the LLC sort of issue, and it's come up at least 2 or 3 times.
In terms of owner occupancy, it's in the definition of
Okay.
owner occupancy of the conditions.
Okay.
So,
Oh, there's,
but, I guess, I mean, what we can do is work on some language to see if we can figure out a way to differentiate between commercial surround, properties that are surrounded by primarily commercial properties and those that are surrounded by primarily residential. And see if we can do that within the conditions rather than with special exception. Because I agree, we'd rather not have to have something for.
Well, what I was hoping was, and that's to have a general discussion of what we're trying to achieve and leave you with the bag of junk and try to come up with words to make that fit how we end up having the discussion. So, nothing's probably going to be perfect. I mean, there's going to be exceptions, but to get something that's closer to what we desire. Being lessening the number of, I'll call it, challenges or looking for exceptions.
And so for the end, would you like us just to look at how those conditions, to look at conditions for those? Or would you like us to, I mean, I'm just getting y'all's thoughts. Do you think we need to look at conditions for those? Like, are there certain places where it would be something that, we should possibly consider allowing in neighborhood mixed use? Or does that seem like too intense of a use for that area?
I mean, for me, having been here all my life, it's kind of hard to be hard and fast on that because the three ends of the tongue. They've been ends all over the town. So
I do feel like having it permitted is probably to,
conditional use.
I think it needs some type of condition. I'm not sure what, I mean, I can. look at
I agree.
what those may be.
Give that some thought. Should we like take that?
So just to be clear, the two takeaways, we have two takeaways so far.
That's what I, yes.
Takeaway one is to review the conditions for short-term rental in neighborhood mixed use to allow for the use on a commercial mixed use property, correct?
Yes, and ones that are taken into account, what it's serving.
The existing. And the second is to create conditions.
Okay, Jesse.
All right. Okay, that was really all I had. I think that's all. So, the accessory structure, is somewhat related because these uses are done in accessory structure, but really a totally separate issue. So in the, amendments that were done in August, we took away any size requirement for accessory structures. Unless they're an ADU. The ADU kept the size requirement. But if it's just an accessory structure, such as a workshop or a garage or a shed or something like that, we took away any size restriction. So previously, what was in there before that was taken away was such structure shall not exceed 50% of the footprint of the dwelling. So the whole structure couldn't exceed 50% of the footprint of the dwelling, which was pretty restrictive, honestly. What was in the zoning ordinance prior to the UDO being adopted was that accessory structures shall have a maximum square footage of 50% of the square footage of the principal structure. So rather than 50% of the footprint, it's 50% of the square footage. So the language for ADUs is that no more than 50% of the gross floor area of the primary building. So it kind of echoes what was previously in our ordinance prior to the UDO being adopted for accessory dwelling.
Gross floor area,
Yeah, so no more.
2-story.
Yeah, so if you have a 2-story structure and your total square footage for your house is 5,000 square feet, say it's, one of these large ones in the historic district, and then a 5,000 square foot structure, your ADU could be up to 2,500 square foot. So what we've noticed since that restriction went away is we've had a decent number of applications of some really large accessory structures. And the issue we're dealing with, other than the fact that some of them are almost the same size as the house, which doesn't really make them accessory or doesn't make them incidental to the primary structure, is that we're starting to have issues with stormwater. Because when we review a new house, they have to give us basic, a kind of a drainage plan to show where the water is going, and generally do swales on the side and that type of thing. And that goes through a pretty decent review through our engineering department for a new house. But when we do a garage or something like that, that generally hasn't gone through the same extent of a review through engineering. Generally, they just check to make sure it wasn't sitting in the well, now we're getting issues where these accessory structures are so large that they're causing drainage issues on adjacent lots. Because we haven't been doing a full review because usually wasn't required because they, the size they're allowed was restricted. So, I mean, we can certainly, and we have tried to change our review process, but we were also really coming to council to see if y'all would consider putting back in a size restriction. Not as restrictive as the previous one, but, and the language I have proposed, which is really just a starting place, it's not, it's just that, such structures footprint shall not exceed 50% of the footprint of the dwelling, except on lots an acre or more in size, where the accessory structure will be more than 100 feet from any property lines. And the reason that exception is there is because obviously if it's more than 100 feet from the property line, the odds of impacting the adjacent property is pretty, you know, most likely that's not going to be impacting the adjacent property. But the reason I went with 50% of the footprint is because if you have a 2-story house, then you could still have a 2-story garage or, you know, a 2-story workshop. It's just the footprint, which is what it, impacts the drainage. The footprint can only be 50% of the footprint of the house. We obviously we could, you know, look at that further if y'all think that might be too restrictive. If, you know, houses that have a smaller footprint. But as you know, as with anything in our UDO, you can always request a variance in unique circumstances. So say you have a large lot, but the house just happens to be a small footprint house. And so you would, say it's a, 900 square foot footprint house, and you can only have 450 square foot footprint garage, and you a large for whatever purposes, then you could get a variance if this were in place. But again, we try to limit. But the reason we're looking at this, the footprint specifically was because it's a drainage issue. And that's what affects the drainage footprint, the amount of impervious surface. So I know Becca's dealt with it directly. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
I've also noticed that people are using it as a kind of get around for short-term rentals. So what they're doing is they're, building this large shell, calling it a garage, and then they're coming back and pulling NEC permits to put it, a kitchen, full bathroom. So kind of having them be similar. I think we cut some of that out, but there's at least 3 projects right now that are in for permitting where the garage is as big as the house. Slightly bigger. So,
in terms of footprint.
yes. And right up to, they only have to go by the accessory structure setback. So that's, most general residential zones, that's 5 feet from your property line and only 10 feet from the side.
So if I look, I'm not sure I'm 100%, if I look at not to achieve 50% of footprint of the dwelling except on lots of an acre or more in size. There ain't no acre or more lots. I know there are, but in terms of the number of lots that are an acre,
Correct.
it's infinitesimal.
Not a whole lot, but there are a number of still in the historic district, and there are some on the outskirts.
But who's lots or, where are lots of an acre? Lots. I'm not talking about houses.
Well, this doesn't say that they can't already have a house.
Right, so I understand. But a predominant size lot is a half acre, 40,000.
Well, like I said, this was just a starting point.
Yeah.
So if you,
So that I'm just first questioning the size. And it says where the accessory structure will be more than 100 feet from the any property line. Tell me what that means.
So it just means the accessory structure would be at least 100 feet from the rear property line, side property line. It wouldn't be anywhere near the edges of the property. And again,
If,
that can be.
if it's that far, it's allowed,
Correct,
okay?
without a size. So basically, if it meets those two requirements, there would be no size restriction. Is what this is trying to say. I did not say that.
It has to meet both of
The way it's currently worded, yes.
them. Is
We
that,
can make
is
it-
that
we can
possible
make it
on a
an
1 acre
indoor-
lot?
Oh, yeah, on 1 acre lot? Yes.
If you gotta have it? That's pretty tough. I'm not a mathematician, yeah, but 1 acre lot, 1 acre lot, 200 by 200. You 100 by this way, 100 by that way.
So you wouldn't be able to
Uh,
separate the structures very much, I guess.
I'm just thinking that makes it pretty tough on the bigger lots. And I'm not sure what the language. No, I understand that. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to get in my head what is there. Help me, what you may not be familiar with it. Help me understand what happened and I was off of your Hagen Road. There was a house out there that was
So then,
like
so the
3
gentleman, the
acres.
gentleman owned 2 lots. When he first came in to ask about doing a garage, we don't allow just a garage on a residentially zoned property by itself. And the reason for that is to try and prohibit people from running businesses out of garages. And so we told him, you would need to abandon your property line to be able to build a garage. Because then you would, and he owned both properties anyway, there was really no reason to have the property line there to begin with. And so he went in, he didn't say anything about what size garage he wanted to do or anything, he just said, I want to build a garage on this lot, and said, well, you can't allow just the garage. The only primary structure we allow on residential lots is a house. So he abandoned the property line, came back to us and said, I want to build a so-and-so size garage, and I'm like, whoa, that's a very large garage, you can't build it more than 50% of the footprint of your house. Now, he doesn't have a small house, but the size garage he wanted to build, he was well over 50% of the footprint. And so we told him he could get a variance, which we told him we would actually, staff would support a variance for that. Because again, his property is almost 3 acres and he was well away from any adjacent property lines. He was definitely over 400 feet from, no, not even close to 100 feet. I guess he did not want to go for a variance. My understanding was he reached out to Bailey at the time and asked what could be done. And that's when it was requested to have that requirement taken away. So that retirement was taken away, amendments, and then he applied for this.
All right, so now if you were to do that today, or somebody would, if we only did one of these, he could build a larger structure.
Oh, he would have met both of these easily.
Yeah, he would have, because he had 3 acres.
Right. Yeah, no, he would have met both of these quite easily. But I mean, again, this was just a starting point.
Okay.
You wanted some language to start with, and so I just pulled this. I looked at what we had previously had, and I looked at some language we had other where, like in the also under accessory dwellings, if you look at location, we have such structure shall not be located in front of the front line of the dwelling that sets on lots on the marsh or water, or where the garage will be more than 100 feet from the front property line. So I just took that same 100 foot, put it in here, just to start with. So.
Bob, is Bob here? I'm just wondering about any thoughts.
It's on.
Jesse, do you have that any property line is
me ask him.
needing all? Or, because I thought it was supposed to just be permitting one.
But again,
I'm just thinking if it's behind, if it's in the rear or side yard, I mean, it's not, they're only gonna have to be 2 property owners.
if this is somewhat flood related, would it make sense to have requirement for this impervious area?
Well, we already have
Wow.
that, I mean, yeah, that's already a requirement. We're just seeing issues even on properties where the meeting the pervious surface. We're seeing issues with these larger accessory structures sending water to adjacent properties. Because they are allowed to do that. I think there's such.
It's probably not practical to have some sort of drainage study.
I mean, right now, we're
For
kind
a
of,
single lot, you can't,
I was gonna
you can't
say,
get enough of a picture for that.
yeah, so it's ending up where we're having to go back after the fact and figure out a way for them to like, okay, can you add gutters here? You know, something to address the issue that the neighbors are having with water getting onto their property.
But you're dealing with very.
He didn't have any
very-
questions.
Very bad spot. It's even for the lot.
Well, because it looks like we didn't put that to start with. But, and I'm not saying this wouldn't happen with, you know, even properties that are over 50%, depending on how large the big house is, but we're trying to minimize the issues as much as possible. Start with, um, to address things. But, again, open to any suggestions, comments. This is, by no means was I think this would be what I find.
Well, we have nothing. So, I tend to fall more on the half acre lots and not 100 feet.
Okay.
I mean, as being somewhere to start that we get counted, you understand what I'm saying, right? Bob, but I'm saying that 50% of the size, if your lot size is
Over a half acre.
over a half acre, you're okay to do this. If your lot size is under it, you're only allowed to do 50% the size of the footprint of your house.
So you say that if it's less than a half acre, you say we utilize the existing for the new language. If it's greater than a half acre, we utilize the current UDO language.
Correct. Yes. But I'm saying if it's a half acre or less,
Still going on.
the 50% rule applies. And
It's 50% of two different things. Right?
So there's the difference. So you're good with 50% of the footprint?
correct.
Okay, as long
On the
as
half
it's on,
acre
as long
or
as
less.
that's less than a
And
half acre,
if it's above, I'm good with it being over.
not having a such.
At least that being a point to start discussion with the council.
So you would,
And Jesse and I think I would
You
want,
don't think you would want to have the no more than 50% of the first floor area, still limiting them somewhat if it's larger than half acre?
I would be okay with that. So I would say up to an acre.
okay, so you would basically agree such structures footprint shall not exceed 50% of footprint of dwelling, except on lots a half acre or more in size.
There are three categories.
Okay, so you're saying.
One category is a half acre.
Less than.
Less than a half acre or less. That is 50% of the structure. 50% of the footprint.
So
A
half acre
to
to
an acre is 50% of the square footage.
This is the planning meeting, right?
Yes, sir.
Mhm.
You were welcome to be here.
Your next meeting starts at 4. And
Right
you,
here.
yes, and you're welcome.
And the third is unlimited, as it is now.
If it's over.
Over an acre. But I think that, at least to me, that addresses the ones that are greater problems.
Okay.
The smaller the lot, the greater the problem.
Correct.
And so you get
Okay.
right. My start.
With the over the acre, do you still want to have some of those offset requirements? Because that makes a good sense. To have some level
I
of
thought we can
setback.
reduce it to like 20 feet, because most of the users are 20 feet. Okay.
I'm just saying,
Maybe that would make a lot of sense. It gets the building away from the property line. Gets it-
And
I
I mean,
I think.
a lot over an acre, you're easily. doing it.
So I'd say, I mean, to me, 50 is not
The deed.
bad.
Okay.
I think they're
So
almost
now
done.
we're-
I think we're almost done. I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Here.
I'm going, the 20 deals nicely with, each one deals nicely with the drainage, with what my councilman Cutler is saying. I also want to deal with the, neighbor.
So these.
Just said stop sharing in meeting. And I'll be back before 4.
Bob, got any questions, or thoughts?
He did not.
Okay, well, I can work on that language as well.
Okay.
And then what I'll do is probably, okay.
Yeah.
I'll just send, y'all's committee an email with that draft language. If y'all are generally okay with it, then I'll start the process with planning commission.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah, that's good.
all right. Thank you very much.
Is there anything else to come before the committee? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All right.